And when we see the performance levels that those top herds are actually achieving, even against the average herds, on average they have 500 litres more milk. They're producing 53 kilos more milk solids per cow. They have 16 days better calving interval. That's translating into a 12% better 6-week calving rate. They're low CO2 emissions. Everything is working in the favour of those highest EBI herds.
Sean Coughlan, CEO of ICBF, joins me for this week's episode to discuss Irish dairy breeding. When Sean joined us on the podcast last year, he highlighted the role of ICBF in moving Irish dairy breeding forward. Part of that was genomics, and genotyping was a new tech in 2024. So I started by asking Sean what they learned from the genotyping programme in 2024 and what changes are there in the programme in 2025.
Yeah, so we've taken on an additional 500 dairy herds, which brings us up to about 4,000 dairy herds, and we have an additional 4,000 beef herds, which brings us up to a total of about 14,500 herds in total. So the number of herds has increased reasonably significantly. Obviously, the beef herds are they'll be registering a smaller number of calves than the dairy herds, but the overall number of herds has gone up. And look, we've had last year, we did have that, I suppose, challenge there at the start. I mean, one of the things that we definitely realized last year was that if we're genotyping 600, 700, 800,000 calves and you're running at, if you have 1% errors or 1% of the animals are running into problems, that does create a challenge, because that's 6, 7, 8, 9,000 calves that have a challenge. And one of the things we did last year, and we continued with this year, was any calf that runs into a problem in the lab or with delays or whatever, that we actually make sure that the blue card is released for that calf, so that farmers, especially looking to move on the male calves, don't get slowed down. So even if you're operating at 99% accuracy on it, that 1% can cause a lot of problems, and especially if every farmer is going to have one or two of those problem calves. So we want to try and keep those moving and try and remove as much friction as we possibly can on farm in that really, really busy season when just farmers don't want to have any hassle.
And then I suppose in terms of what it's brought to the industry then, Sean, like the correction of parentage errors, correction of dam errors, all of these things, like there's a lot to be said for that. That again, I don't think people really realize the advantages of it to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think I mean, undoubtedly, look, we knew the errors were there, and they still are there, and I mean, it's just a fact of life. I mean, if especially on the busy dairy farms, coming up to 4 or 5 cows calved, it's often very difficult to know which is which. I think one of the things we're also noticing, I think, is that people have gotten a lot more confident with the system since last year. So they're more inclined to actually not be worried too much about which cow should be with which calf. They'll send off the sample, and they know that it'll actually come back and it will be correct. So definitely that's giving people a bit of confidence, and definitely cutting down on labor as well for farmers, because they come up in the morning, maybe they've been up during the night. The last thing they want to be doing is spending too much time trying to match cows to calves and doing lots of data recording. They can tag the calf, put the sample in the envelope or into the tube, put the tube in the envelope, and away they go. I think one of the things was from last year was, I think farmers got much more comfortable with actually sending away, knowing that really sending away the samples, a couple of times a week made a big difference to the turnaround times, and that was definitely a help again this year in terms of keeping things moving.
And I suppose just in terms of the actual gains that we're going to see then as a result of the genotyping, I suppose that's probably something that I'd like to get you to reiterate to people, I suppose. So we really can move things on now by identifying these very high elite females that are on farms born as calves. So within basically 2 or 3 weeks, we have a really good figure for some. And I think Donna has highlighted it to us, maybe as advisors at some trainings that we've done, that like your parent average was the best we could work with all along. But there is huge range within that parent average. So you could have, I suppose, as Donna describes it, you could have a tall, thin person in the family, and you could also have a very short, stumpy person in the family as well. And that's just the way the genes aligned, basically.
Absolutely. No, and I suppose there's a couple of other things there where the dynamic is changing as well. So previously you would have had maybe, farmers, they might have had, you know, if they were looking for 25 replacements, they might have brought in 35 or 40 heifer calves, and then they would have sold them on. I think the market has changed a little bit in the last couple of years in terms of people. I think are breeding the number of replacements much closer to, and putting that number of calves to the ground much closer to what they actually need. Now, the advantage with that is they can go straight to beef, maybe use sex semen to breed some of those, pick the cows. But one of the things there, which is you know, slightly working, maybe the genomics piece, is that they don't have the same selection then. So maybe they're bringing, you know, they only have a few extra to what they would normally have. They don't have 30 or 40% extra. And that's where the real advantage was to the early adopters, I think, on the genomics piece, is that, you know, somebody needed 20 heifers, they had 40 calves. They could genotype the 40 calves, keep the best 20, and move on the other 20. You know, so there's a little bit of a dynamic there. I think as well the dynamic of sex semen is an interesting one, in terms of, I think there's a lot more of our top EBI cows are being bred to sex semen. So the ability then to actually identify the bull calves, these outlier bull calves. You know, we're not seeing the same jump on that as in previous years. So that's one of the areas we need to look into as well. But the other thing I would say that we are seeing is we are seeing high EBI calves and bull calves coming from a much larger range of herds than we might have previously. So the fact that we have 4,000 herds that are actually genotyping calves, these bull calves, these outliers, they can come from potentially anywhere. So that's definitely a big advantage that we're seeing, to having more and more herds involved in the genotyping program.
Has the genotyping created a situation where the average EBI has actually jumped up a little bit as a result of it?
We're definitely continuing to see a good jump in the average EBI of both, say, the heifer calves born this year, and also the first calved heifers that have calved for the first time this spring. Definitely a good jump in that. I mean, where we're not seeing as high is, we're not seeing the top end bull calves, you know, hitting. You know, we haven't seen any, at least as of today. I'm not seeing any that are hitting the 400 mark just yet. They're getting up close to it, but in, you know, so while the national average is rising, that top end, and we really need to look at how do we keep that top end keep rising, so that the very, very highest EBI herds have these bull calves at the very top.
Okay, and there's two things coming out of that now. So, is there a kind of, it's an awful question to say, is there a plan in place in terms of those bulls, that bull piece that you've mentioned there? So because there's less being put in calf to conventional AI, there's less outliers appearing because there's fewer calvings to dairy overall, basically. So in terms of generating the next generation of bulls that are going to carry us forward, where's that planning at, in terms of making sure that we do achieve that? Like,
so there's two aspects to that. One is the fact that we are actually continuing to genotype more and more calves. That will help mitigate some of that. But definitely, I think the evolution that there's an evolution going to happen in the next few years around more and more contract matings, maybe some more targeted breeding programs at both at AI company level, and we'll be looking to try and facilitate some of that from an ICBF perspective as well, to make sure that we continue to make those gains.
And then the second question then is coming back to your point about the people maybe generating 30-40% surplus heifers and so forth. And you are right, we're definitely seeing that there's less and less of the top herds beginning to produce those, because in a lot of cases it's nitrates related, maybe stocking rates related and so forth. They just don't have the capacity to carry some of these animals anymore. But is that an actual negative for the industry, in terms of that these high genetic material heifers or cows maybe are being put in calf to beef on some herds that shouldn't be, maybe?
I completely agree, Stuart. I think it's a crying shame in that a lot of these top herds are using any beef. I mean, you know, I know there are disease challenges and so on, but I really would love to see all of the replacement heifers for herds that are in, say, the bottom 20-30% nationally in terms of EBI. I'd love to see them trying to buy in heifers from these top herds rather than trying to breed them themselves, because they're never going to. It's just going to take such a difficult road to catch up to those top herds. And when we see the performance levels that those top herds are actually achieving, even against the average herds, you know, they've, you know, on average they have 500 litres more milk. they're producing 53 kilos more milk solids per cow. They have 16 days better calving interval, that translating into a 12% better 6-week calving rate. They're low CO2 emissions. Everything is working in the favor of those highest EBI herds, and it really is. I do think it's a lost opportunity that we're not able to filter some of the surplus replacements from those herds back down, and in effect make the breeding or make the providing of replacements a much easier proposition for some of the herds in further down the scale. But look, there's all sorts of there's practical issues, there's financial issues, there's disease issues, there are various reasons, but I'd love to see us find a way to actually try and overcome that, because I think that there's huge potential untapped in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say if people are contemplating that they need to do something about improving their own EBI, they should be looking around them to see can they contact somebody that has a good high EBI herd, because I think the willingness would be there if they thought the market was there for most of those people. So
I completely agree on that. I mean, one of the challenges that I think some of the herds have found over the last couple of years is maybe that the hardest animals to shift in some ways were actually the heifer calves. The dairy heifer calves were tricky to shift, and that has made people nervous about actually generating surplus heifer calves. But even from the point of view of we are seeing some people starting to actually engage, some people engage with high EBI herds and give that commitment before a straw is ever put in the calf, that if they generate an extra 10 and an extra 15 heifer calves, that they'll have a market for them, and that they'll take them as calves, or that they'll go and contract rear them, or whatever the case is. But I do think that you do need that certainty almost at the point of insemination to make sure, am I going to put a dairy straw on this cow, or am I going to put a beef straw on this cow? There won't be any hassle in moving on the beef calf. It's making sure that there's a market for that dairy calf, and I do think that I think there's an opportunity as an industry. I mean, to really do something innovative around that, because I think the payback would be enormous.
yeah, just for the industry as a whole, as well as the individual farmers that would engage in it, yeah.
Absolutely, and whether it could be done at processor level, I do think you need that element of almost of a contract in place, and that's maybe what makes it a bit tricky, because I think there's two things. One is somebody that's generating the dairy calves want to be sure that they have a market for those, and also if somebody is depending on a being able to source those, and therefore not generating them themselves, they want to be sure that they have a source of replacements down the road. So you do almost need that contract element, and the real challenge then becomes you probably need somebody to underwrite that contract in case somebody decides to try and bail out of that deal. But look,
Yes.
I mean, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not something that we should be looking to pursue and try and see what could be done to realize the potential that's undoubtedly there.
And sure, I suppose if people just want to reinforcement as to why this is a good idea, like all they need to do is look at some of the new entrants' performance, will say where they buy the right stock, and equally so where new entrants buy the wrong stock. There's the performance that those new entrant herds can achieve in a very short space of time is phenomenal, really, on the basis of the genetics that they buy.
It's remarkable, and in many cases they because they are new entrants, they're spoiled. They don't actually realize
They never had a bad day.
Yeah, exactly. They don't realize what it was to deal with poor EBI animals.
Yeah. Just I suppose moving on, I suppose from that conversation to the beef element, then Sean, like dairy beef came in a couple of years ago. CBV has come on the scene since, obviously, for the people that will be buying the calves. Calves are lightning hot at the moment on the back of an €8 a kilo talk beef price. So very easy to move calves currently, as you were saying earlier. And maybe the question then that dairy farmers will be saying, sure, why would I be worried about trying to generate anything more of higher value should they're all making the same thing, kind of. It's still an important point that people need to give consideration to, because with the dairy beef index, we're looking at both the calving element and the beef element. But you're saying that from an initial look at the data that you're seeing, the tendency is still more towards the calving ease piece rather than generating that better value calf or higher quality calf.
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose, I mean, I don't know if that's ever actually going to change, Stuart, because I think it's not reasonable to expect any dairy farmer to deal with any level of significant calving difficulty, and the payback is just not there. I mean, it's a hard enough spring at the best of times without drawing extra calving difficulty onto one just to try and get a few more kilos of carcass. However, I would say that once a dairy farmer decides on their level of acceptable calving difficulty for cows, for example, let's say it's a 4% calving difficulty or whatever it is, 3%, 4%, 5%, whatever that level of calving difficulty is, there's a massive range in terms of the quality of bull and the beef quality of that bull that's available at that level of calving difficulty. I mean, in some cases, it could be 10, 15, 20 kilos of carcass, which is an enormous value for the person that's actually buying the calf. And we are seeing, on the calving survey data that does come in from farmers is that, the bulls that are there at maybe at their 3% or their 4% calving difficulty, that's the level of difficulty that's actually being recorded. So we're really are seeing that to get that extra beef, you won't have any extra calving difficulty if the calving difficulty figure for that bull is 4%. And we're seeing massive variation on that. And really we want to. No, I do think the AI companies as well have done a much better job in recent times in terms of the quality and the panels of bulls that are actually available. But I do think that we do need to be, and as you say, I mean, at the moment calves are on fire, so it doesn't matter what you have, you'll be able to move them. But look, we know how things ebb and flow, and I think I think if there's increased beef merit to be an increased carcasses to be achieved from the dairy beef side without giving up anything in terms of our calving difficulty, it's not something that we should be looking to achieve that. Obviously, then the dairy farmer needs to get paid for that calf, but we're confident that with the CBV going forward, and it's a rock solid index. We see day in, day out that the higher CBV calves are delivering better in terms of their growth rates, their weight gains, their slaughter weights, the carcass conformation, and the age at slaughter. So we're seeing very, very good results there in terms of the CBV, and we saw that even from Ballyvaden and from other places there last year. So quite confident in terms of the CBV, and really looking as we head into the breeding season now that I would say any dairy farmer, set your calving difficulty and then use the best beef quality bull that you can for that given level of calving difficulty.
But that's the important point, I think, Sean. Like, I think I looked at it last year, and there was just on Angus's alone, there was a huge number of Anguses available that were hitting those 3% and 4% in terms of calving difficulty. So no calving difficulty. Like, you have Friesians that are harder calving than a lot of the Anguses that are out there now. But the variation in terms of the carcass weight was quite significant. Like, so that the scope is there, but just the intent has to be there. And like you said, like the figures are ringing true. 3 or 4% in 100, or 3 or 4 in 100 are going to be an issue. But that's the same as the Frisian bulls that are being used maybe in a lot of herds as well. So it's not, there's no calving difficulty effectively there.
Yeah, I mean, and as I say, like set your appetite for calving difficulty, and then we can see. And the challenge again becomes, and look, we've been reiterating this, and this is where the CBV really comes into its own. If you have an Angus bull calf, at 4 weeks of age, it's very, very hard to tell two calves apart, and it's really from there when they get to 2, 3, 4 months old, and you see the differences start to appear. And the CBV is there to pick that up at day one, and we need to use that. I mean, because there's huge value there.
And I think, Sean, to be fair, the point still has to be made as well that even though the calves are on fire at the moment, like if you're buying a calf at 300, or buy 5 calves at 300, and there's one at 70 of a CBV and there's one at 140 of a CBV, the one at the 140 is still going to leave you more money and potentially leave it to you quicker.
There's no question about it. There's no question about it. And we're seeing it time and time again, because those particular traits that are in the CBV are very reliable.
So I suppose moving on then, Sean, there's Simon Lanigan gave a talk at the beef your own conference last year just before Christmas, and talks of updates coming. So what's on the cards that people should be aware of now? Just give us a broad outline of them, really.
So there's a couple of things that are in process, and we'll have to go through a formal process of doing the finishing off the research and making sure everything is ready. But there's a few things potentially that are being talked about. One is potentially a base change. So we did that back, I think, in 2016 was the last time we did it. So that would just mean that the base is reset. So every animal would maybe come back in depending 60, 70 euros, but they'd all come back. So it just resets the base and just captures the genetic gain. Economic values are potentially going to get updated on the dairy side. There's some work happening around the health and the management traits that we'll be looking to implement. So there's a number of things there, Stuart, that are potentially going to come forward. Nothing that's going to be earth-shattering in any way. But look, we want to keep the evolution of the indexes, that we want to keep them moving and keep to make sure that they're as up to date as they possibly can be.
And just on the economic piece, Sean, out of interest, we'll say, how do you decide that needs to be updated? We'll say there'll be people maybe listening that'll wonder, why don't you update it every year, basically? If milk price is high one year, should it be at such a rate, and should it be at a lower rate than in a bad milk price year?
Yeah, so I think the key thing, first of all, it's the economic model from Moorpark that actually drives the economic values. And I think the key thing is that when we're looking at economic values, when we're looking at the cows that we're going to the inseminations that are going to happen this spring, you're looking for the herd of cows that's going to be there in 3, 4, 5 years time. So it's really, you're trying to predict forward, and this is what Lawrence Chalou in Moorpark will be doing. He'll be trying to take a view as to, well, what is the predicted milk price going to be, and what's the product mix going to be at processor level in 2030, 2031. Because that's the type of cow that we want to be actually breeding. So the short-term fluctuations in milk price don't really come into it, because he's still going to be using either OECD or EU figures or FAPRI figures or whatever to actually predict, well, what is the expected milk price going to be in 2030, and that's going to be the determinant of the tweaks that will happen to the economic values, much more so than the milk price of today or last month or next month.
Okay, very good. Thanks for explaining that. The other question then that Simon had brought up was maybe looking at some of the type elements as well. So I suppose some people in the past would have kind of felt that the EBI euro value itself was driving the selection of some of the bulls that came through, and that they mightn't have been maybe the best for feet and legs and teat placement and udders and so forth. So you've looked at the kind of maybe incorporating a little bit more of the type trait into EBI to kind of address that maybe?
That research is very much ongoing, Stuart. I mean, ultimately, we do need cows that are functional, that don't get lame, and also that don't get mastitis, and that have others that will last into 4, 5, 6, 7 lactations, whatever farmers need. So it's not necessarily a type from the point of view of just having a fancy looking cow. It's very much making sure that we have a functional cow that does not get lame, and that has a good udder and can stay healthy for a long number of years, and that's where the overlap is going to come there between the linear traits and making sure that we have a good functional cow going forward.
Like, that's kind of the future for the next 12 months. Is there anything in the longer term future that people maybe need to be conscious of? Or like, I think you've probably outlined a couple of interesting things there in the course of the conversation. I think it's something that we would have maybe talked about a couple of years ago. And as you said, the sex semen has probably changed the direction a little bit in terms of using some of those higher EBI herds to generate replacements. The mechanism as to how that actually happens is one that's worth exploring, obviously. The dairy beef has improved significantly. And again, that's work that was going back to 13, 14, 15. So we're reaping the rewards of that currently. What's on the agenda?
I think if I was to highlight maybe one more that's going to come, Stuart, from the genomics, is that we're identifying a number of major genes, and some of which are maybe not of a positive nature. For example, there's this HH3 variant that's there, and one of the things that happens if you have a HH3 cow and it's mated to a HH3 bull, you actually could have the risk of embryo death, and you won't actually know. So the cow will go on calf, but the embryo won't last. One of the really exciting things coming forward potentially is to use sire advice, because we have the cows genotyped, we have the bulls genotyped. We're actually able to make sure that in a sire advice scenario, maybe they're both EBI, you still want to breed replacements from using that bull cow combination, but where that combination might be that you have HH3, for example, on the bull and HH3 on the cow, you make sure that they're not matching up, and that you avoid that combination, and run the sire advice on that basis. And if you're doing DIY, well, you print off your sire advice result and you use that. Or if you're using a technician service, we'll feed that down onto the technician handheld and make sure that the technician isn't doing it. So it's taking inbreeding and taking it to the next level in terms of the major genes, and that's one of the additional benefits that having the herd genotype actually brings to us. So I think that there's some exciting potential in that regard.
So obviously there's a number of those kind of recessive alleles that you're identifying, and the HH3 is just one of them.
That's just one of them, and it happens to be, some of them have royalties on them, some of them don't. So the ones that don't have royalties, we're able to just take and use automatically. Some of the other ones are a little bit more complex, but look, so but it's an evolving space there, and I think that there's lots of potential there to actually reduce the number of embryo deaths on farm, and I think that would be that's a real tangible benefit to those that have done the genotyping.
Yeah, and it's often a major source of frustration for farmers, obviously, especially in a seasonal calving system like we run here in Ireland, that you have your cow and calf, and effectively it'll be some date in the month of August that this cow will break down, and it's too late.
Yeah, it's too late. And she might even be standing calf at that stage.
Yeah, and ultimately it could have been avoided potentially.
Yes,
and the farmers often quizzing themselves as to what happened or why did this happen, but they actually it was going to happen no matter what they did.
Exactly. No, so that's one of the potential exciting areas coming forward. And if you come forward in the next, it's not that far away.
Yeah. So again, I suppose the final thing, Sean, I'm blown away by the genotyping. I think the power that's in that, it's the genomics back a couple of years ago was a huge leap forward for genetics in Ireland in particular. And this is the next huge step forward. The capacity to actually move the entire national herd to a genotyped scenario. What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, look, we're working hard. I think last summer, to be honest, we reopened the national genotyping last summer. I think last summer was particularly difficult for farmers on many fronts. I think the spring really dragged on. The weather wasn't good. Maybe grass was scarce, ground was poor, and farmers just didn't have there wasn't much enthusiasm on farm, I think, last summer. So when we opened it, we maybe didn't get the level of response we might have hoped. We're going to reopen it again this summer. We'll certainly be hoping, and I think we'll definitely get a better bounce. So look, we're taking it in steps to keep moving it on. I mean, that is the ultimate goal. I mean, it is the part of government strategy as well to actually have the whole herd genotyped by 2030, and we're going to keep pushing on there and keep driving on to make sure that actually is realized.
Very good, Sean. So I think another, even though we were only covering the last 12 months this time around, a very positive story to tell yet again. And ICBF and Irish breeding basically going from strength to strength on foot of the huge information that's in the database and the people that are working on that information, both at your side and at our side in Teagasc as well, using that data to generate the future type of cow that we need for Ireland, and a real positive story to tell. So well done to everybody in the team in ICBF.
Thanks, Stuart.
That's all for this week's episode of the Dairy Age podcast, and my thanks to Sean Coughlan for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. We also have a dedicated Dairy Age email address that you can contact us with if you wish on dairyage.podcast@teagasc.ie. I'm Stuart Childs, and join us next time for your Dairy Age.